question is around spaciness, and it's interesting because there's resistance to even validating the question with a response. And maybe part of that is gendered. Not wanting to be seen as Spacey as a female. Because that's been there's been a lot of messages around how that's not me, that shouldn't be me, and what spaciness actually is. And the question comes up because with awakening and with illness, there can be this perception and this shift affectively in my affect. In my demeanor. Where the mind identification and the powerhouse of mental activity may no longer be the ultimate center of this living being. And there's space here. And I wonder if the word spaciousness was used instead of spaciness, what connotations that would bring. Certainly there is a kind of spaciness that is disassociated and disconnected. And bypassing of true reality and kind of in the clouds, kind of untethered. That's not what I'm talking about. I guess the question isn't specific, but what's experienced here that feels spacious and maybe seen as spacey is a loosening of grip on thought. Thoughts come and go and they're not taken as seriously. They're used what's the word? They're used practically. I have to set up this meeting to have a session with this patient, or I need to... It's kind of hard to artificially narrate thought because the way it happens when it's not the identity is it's very light, and it's impossible to say how articulated and real a thought is versus the life just living itself and taking care of itself. But when the thoughts are really taken so seriously and the tension around that is predominant, then there's no real space. It's very dense. interesting that the word dense is also used to kind of name the same thing as spacey. And a lot of those words are used to kind of manipulate people into doubting their authenticity and manipulate people into control. And not that there's one nefarious person, but the thought process and the identification process just separates and manipulates in just kind of an organic way. So it's part of all this, and the paradox of life is that it's also problematic. It's both totally fine and problematic. And it's only when we see that the problem is totally fine that it's allowed to not be resisted and soften and become space, which it already is. So the reality of, can I really talk about this? I don't know. But I think initially with the process of awakening through disability, there was fear of spaciness. When cognitive shifts would happen and the falling away of who I wasn't was impossible to prevent anymore. Like, parts of my affect and my act as this person were ripped out of my hands, so to speak. And there was emptiness, which is truth. There's nothing at the center. And emptiness is also fullness, but there was emptiness. And there was a feeling of, wow, I feel really spacey. I feel like I can't achieve, I can't perform, I can't participate. I can't sharply answer that person's question. I can't sharply jump into this conversation. I can't give a clear, honest answer to what's wrong with me. I don't even know what's going on. So all this spaciness happening, and the beginning, it was really disturbing. I didn't want to be an idiot. I didn't want to be dense. I didn't want to be an airhead. I didn't want to be all these things. Now that's felt very differently because there's a trust in the spaciousness. It's not threatening, it's life affirming. And because it's not threatening, it doesn't feel untethering. True spaciousness is utterly grounding. It's that whole mindfulness teaching on non-doing, non-striving, just be. What is it like to just be? That doesn't mean we all just stare at a wall, but what if sometimes we do? And then by staring at a wall, life at some point lifts us up out of the chair into action. What's so threatening about being nothing and spacious? And that's not to say if you're feeling that arising and there's fear or maybe even terror at the spaciousness, at the nothingness, that that's not valid, because really meeting that means really letting go of something, of someone, and that's not trivial. That's not even hard, that's beyond. That's the point where the words aren't capable of capturing or describing, and the phrase "I'm dying" or "death" can come up sometimes to describe this. And please know that that's not said in a melodramatic or a misleading way. It's really why this process of awakening and spiritual opening is so, historically, has been so rarely encountered, because it is so significant in that way. And I'm dancing around the actual center of it, because there is no center and there's no real way to say this is what happens, this is you die, and that's it. Like, yes, you do, and what actually dies? What is death? So Spacey knows. On one side of culture, it's viewed so insultingly, and here there's a saying of there's not much deeper place to be.